Take it away.
I want to say one that I really loved your section, Gabe.
Oh, thank you.
Like made me feel a lot better about my section in like the way that sometimes it's okay to just like learn, you know?
Yeah.
You don't always have to have an actionable next step. Do actionable next steps help? Yes. But I was like really anxious. I was like, I don't have enough things people can do when they're done with the show. And I was like,
Oh,
oh,
no.
what are we going to do? They need next steps, guys. They need them. And I was like, okay, there are some. But also part of this whole journey is learning. So I feel better about my section. So thank you.
You're welcome.
You did that, friend. But yeah, first I want to talk about how much I love this book. I read this book quicker than I've ever read any other book in the history of my entire life, which is saying something because I would take months to read like children's youth fiction. And adult fiction would take me like months. I remember reading like The Book Thief in college, and it took me literally like 6 months to get through that book. I got through this book in 2.5 days, which I think
Wow.
really says one, the power of accessibility through script, but also just like how great this book was.
Yeah.
Like I literally felt like I could not put it down, and don't tell anyone. I didn't say this, but I did. Like I would read it in all of my downtime. Like literally, like I have 2 seconds in between a meeting. I'm gonna read like 6 pages. Like
Mm-hmm.
such an integral part of my day for these 2.5 days that I was like obsessed. I could not put it down. And I think part of what that was one, what this like book was doing. Like I think like as you were saying, Gabe, that, like it really just took things. It wasn't just hopeless. I
Mm-hmm.
felt like honestly, we're going to talk about Handmaid's Tale. Like, I felt very hopeless at the end of that book. Like there was
Yeah.
no good to happen ever
Yeah.
again. Everything's just terrible, and it's just how life is. But it wasn't that. This book was horrifying, yes, but it also like taught me so much in accepting change and accepting like reality, and also like realizing like we do have the power to shape that, and also we have the power to prepare and learn, and like sometimes even if it feels small, like the greatest thing you can do is just learn stuff so that you can one teach others but also prepare yourself. So this book was amazing. That's how I feel.
Yeah.
And that it gave you something very tangible at the end. And the world inside Parable of the Sower and Talents, as we were saying, is like feels so close to ours, eerily similar in that it almost felt like it was providing an answer to a question that internally I've been like repeating in my head for a few years now. And that's like, what, if anything, can I do to prepare for the inevitable chaos that is building and building? And
Mm-hmm.
then what, if anything, can I do to stop it, shape it, change it, do something,
Mm-hmm.
And even through a work of fiction, this book gave tangible next steps to help with that anxiety surrounding that feeling, and not like rejecting it, just like working around it, accepting that that feeling is going to exist, and like learning how to cope with that in a way that felt very understandable and valid. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so, however long we may have before things get worse, this book provides ways to cope with that inevitability. Earthseed being a practical and logical way of understanding the world around us in its ever changing ways. There's a lot of comfort in the idea that Octavia Butler proposes as a way to deal with reality, ways to make sure you survive change, adapt to change, and while doing so, help others. It seems that in the many years since the publishing of Parable of the Sower in 1993 and Parable of the Talents 2001, much of the country has not changed for the better in addressing these serious concerns. Time has made many of the problems addressed in these books even more prevalent, closer to the dystopian, and that part of what makes this book so impactful is that it feels now,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And Octavia's perspective and foresight on the state of the US is hauntingly accurate, and many of us in our current lives can relate to the characters within the story in a very visceral and real way, to the point where like when you get to the really sad parts, you literally feel like you've lost your friends,
Yeah.
and it makes you sad for like 3 days. So
Yeah.
like you miss them, and you're like, I don't actually know these people. Like these
Yeah.
are book characters, but you like feel that. And I think that's just
Mm-hmm.
like it is a testament to her writing style. And also just how real a lot of the stuff is. So in my section, I'm going to provide you with some historical context for Parable of the Sower and Parable of the Talents. While Parable of the Sower was written in 1980s and 1990s, uh, its influence from those time periods is very clear in reading the book, because a lot of these themes of things to fear, but also like problems societally were really coming to a head in the 80s. So, to provide that context, the big concerns of the 80s were illiteracy, wealth inequality, crime, homelessness, and climate change, among other things. There these things are actively present throughout the themes of the book and tie together in like that intersectional way in which they all kind of like cause and shape each other
Mm-hmm.
in the same way that change does. So, illiteracy ties into wealth inequality as well as crime and homelessness, and all these factors influence the prevalence of illiteracy in this like cyclical way. Additionally, all of these impact climate change and our financial barriers to make a positive impact on our planet. So, I would like to thank a study guide for Octavia Butler's Parable of the Sower, which Gabe showed me, and which provided a lot of like overview of the influence of the book, and then like influenced my research for the following. So I'm going to start with illiteracy. In 1989, it was estimated that 13% of 17-year-olds in America could not read or write, and that 20 million Americans had problems with literacy. For Octavia's lens, in writing this book, literacy levels were an important piece to the puzzle that led to the world Lauren lived in. In the 1980s, according to a study guide, the study guide mentioned previously, 96% of those between 21 and 25 years old had basic reading levels, so like elementary. But less than 28 were capable of reading a map as well as well enough to like use it properly. By 1990,
That would be me. I don't know if I can read a map.
that's one of the things we have to learn about to prep.
That's so true.
Yeah. By 1993, it was estimated that over 40% of the adult population fell short of the literacy skills needed to succeed on a day-to-day basis.
That is so stressful.
Yeah, it's gone up. So that's fun.
Oh, good.
So where are we now? An article from USA Today titled "Illiteracy is Costing America. Here's Why." The US reading crisis is 20 years in the making. 130 million read below a sixth grade level, written by Nick Gade, president of the Lexia Learning, which is like the main tool used a lot in public schools to evaluate reading levels, as well as like method. We actually use it at my work and also when I was working in schools. And it's like the way they level books as well as like have tests for the thing. So they ties into like public standardized testing. They speak on the current literacy situation in the US, and according to the US Department of Education, nearly 130 million American adults read below a sixth grade level. Now consider how that number represents more than half of the adults of the US population. It's like 54%, I believe, if I remember correctly. The cause of these illiteracy rates and also like these low literacy rates, so like they can read, but
not well.
Yeah, not well. And those illiteracy and literacy rates are similar to the ones in the 1980s in that they connect to poverty and wealth inequality as a major cause. The history of redlining and discriminatory educational funding also adds to this issue, and these things have only been more drastically impacted by the pandemic, specifically the digital divide, to shift schooling to homes. Technology and internet had to have existed, which it doesn't exist for much of the population in the United States. Like there's a very big divide in digital access as well as internet access. Kids having to like do their homework in a McDonald's parking lot because that's like the only place that has free Wi-Fi.
Yep.
The issues of the 1980s have not seemed to improve much despite the recognition that it's a national problem. In the 1980s, there was like a big call for literacy activists. Like there needs to be more supports for literacy and teaching people how to read. But the solutions to these things haven't been productive in a lot of ways, in that their causes aren't being addressed. It's very much like we don't teach critical race theory here, energy.
Yeah.
In that, like, the problem is that they're not acknowledging like the systemic aspect of this, like the fact that it's intentionally done this way is not what's being addressed. It's more like we need to do this or that. And it's usually organized into actually like increasing the disparities between schools, because they're like, those kids are hopeless, there's no future for them, so we're just going to invest more in the places that are doing well by judging standardized testing, totally not acknowledging, one, that standardized tests are written to be racist because they're geared to have white children succeed, or socially economically like well-off kids succeed, because the things that they even reference are outside of the lens of the populations that they're testing. Like, they're kids who don't go to public school is who they're writing these tests for. And all of that to say, like, the system itself, in attempting to solve the problem, has in many ways made the problem worse. So I am not a data person. I want to say that to start. So I'm going to have to assume the math that I've read in articles is accurate. I've done like a little bit of data acknowledgement, but it's very hard for me to figure out because it's just so many numbers all in one place. So if someone would like to fact check me, if you think I'm full of crap and I don't know what I'm talking about, you can do so. I've listed a link in my blog that lists the original data source that tells us all these numbers. But my interpretation of it, based on all the articles that I read, is that according to Think Impact, about 21% of the US adults are considered illiterate, meaning they score a level 1 or below. And that's according to 2022. 21% of adults in this country are considered illiterate. So that's just something to sit with. And then the other percent, about 130 million American adults they can read, but they read below a 6th grade level. So like 54, then 21%, and then there's another percentage that reads like real good.
Yeah.
So literacy impacts many areas of life, but especially income, meaning that low literacy rates, especially if more than half of the US adults read below a 6th grade level, mean that poverty is an inevitability according to our current societal structure. It is intentionally in place. It's also something that's like very obvious in like a lot of misogynistic literature, as well as just like in Handmaid's Tale, that one of the lines in there is like, the problem was we taught them how to read, in referencing women. So like, this is all very intentionally done. Literacy and the literacy rates are the way that they are because there is a systemic problem.
In Parable of the Talents, women aren't allowed to read either.
So exactly. It kind of ties back to that. There's a recognition that illiteracy leads to oppression, or ease in oppression, like being able to oppress people because they do not have within our societal structure any power if they have the inability to read, because the system is organized to make sure that you need to have these certain skills to succeed, because your whole life is to have purpose, not potential. Capitalism, fun stuff. Next, I'll talk about wealth inequality. Income inequality is something that is a big thing in this book, as well as just like the lack of access to income in general, as well as like the wealth inequality and disparities between the very rich, the middle class, and the very poor. But it's really big, the way it influences them is more how the characters view wealth as well. Like if we're thinking of the cults, not Acorn, but like the ones that are like, eat the rich, we gotta burn everything down. A lot of this has to do with our perception of wealth, and how that relates to like the idea of the middle and upper middle class. The vast gap between the 0.01% and the 0.1% and everyone else influences this perception of wealth in a way that skews and like divides everyone below that line. So something we see is in Parable of the Sower and Talents is that self-sufficiency is equated to rich when within the eat the rich mantra in that version of society. And it's largely like what we see now in dividing the upper middle class and people suffering from poverty, in that the poor are blamed for all the problems. They're the depraved, deplorable, whatever, like they're the ones who can be, they're the problem, and we need to get rid of them, and that will solve everything. That will make it so that I can be like the top 0.01% because I'm so close to there, when that idea isn't real. So what it ends up doing for like the very poor is that we see even the top 10%, even the middle 40%, as rich comparatively because there's such a vast difference in income inequality. And this is what kind of influences the whole painted people who literally are burning people who, yes, they have walls, but even people who don't have walls, anyone who has just like slightly more is sustaining themselves in any way is considered rich in that analogy. So I found a really fun chart that shows this in a really easy to understand way. Look at this fun chart that I found. Most of us are the depressing green line that goes so low off the chart that you can't even see it sometimes. The middle 40% are doing just okay with some level of self-sufficiency, but are likely a layoff away from joining the green line. The top 10% are a few fire humans away from joining the bottom 90, and the top 1% that is often talked about as like the big enemy is actually closer to the bottom 50% than the top 0.1 or 0.01%. So in comparison to the 0.1 and 0.01%, the top 1% aren't even that rich. They're just very far enough above like the 10% to like kind of have stuff and manage themselves in a somewhat like have a somewhat safe situation in the parable of the sower dystopian world. They're like house seed. What are they called? The places that wanted to take Bankole as a doctor. They're just like a little bit more well off and are able to like kind of like maintain their semblance of normalcy in this post-apocalyptic hellscape. But this is like my interpretation of where we currently stand, in that it's interesting that this divide that Octavia like writes about so clearly is relatively small, but it's also growing. Like if we think about the 1980s, if you look at the chart again, the 1980s, the wealth disparities were not that great.
It wasn't as severe.
Like it was rising, sure, but it was not where we are in 2020, where you can't, there's not even a way to reach the people at the top in that version. So if anything, it's just like a really stressful, what is the word? Prediction. It's like she knew. She's like, we see it's going up a little bit. It's going to keep going. Just going to keep going there. So the next thing I'll talk about is crime. Crime is a very prevalent theme in the book, and the fear of crime is something that was really prevalent in the 1990s, even though crime statistics went down in the 1990s, but there was still this large fear of crime and this idea that it was going to increase largely due to the news and the political climate. The majority of Americans viewed crime as a serious issue that needed attention, but simultaneously misunderstood the actual causes of crime, similar to how they misunderstood the actual causes of illiteracy, among other things. This meant that the solutions that were sought out, funded, etc., were influenced by this skewed perspective that are largely influenced by racism, capitalism, ableism, homophobia, and transphobia. This fear of crime is what influences the push of the traditionalist white Christian America in the book, as well as in our actual real life country, because there's this fundamental misunderstanding of the causes of crime. That crimes at large stem from a lack of funding of education, social programs, housing supports. You shouldn't have to pay for insurance or medical service. Like you have a right to exist without being able to just pay for stuff. That the fact that we have a system that necessitates paying for stuff necessitates crime, and that will always exist if we do not make the supports and fund the things that actually need the supports that support like livelihoods and people existing in a way where they're not on death's doorstep every day. That will solve crime and all of the other issues. But the misunderstanding is also very prevalent today in our current political climate. You can see that through the pandemic, as well as increased poverty resulting in even more desperate populations and an increase in crime because of that. According to a study about today, pandemic, social unrest, crime in the US cities year-end 2021 update indicates that crime has increased in all areas from 2019 to 2021, largely due to the economic impact of the pandemic, especially homicides, aggravated and gun assaults, and domestic violence specifically rose the most. And what was interesting is that the only statistics that seemed to go down were burglary, larceny, and drug offenses, specifically between 2020 and 2021. So there was not data within this document that I found that listed the comparison between 2019 and 2020, which I honestly think would have been more helpful.
Yeah.
Because that probably would have said something different. However, something that did increase very drastically between 2020 and 2021 was car thefts. Specifically, they increased by 14%, which, considering the prices of cars right now and gas, that makes a lot of sense. Considering, like, in the book, how prevalent car theft or like the complete non-existence of cars was in Parable of the Sower and Talents, it makes a lot of sense. And there's that feeling of lack of prospects and economic growth that is something that many Americans feel, especially in trying to find jobs that don't actively put you in harm's way, let alone finding jobs at all. Also in relevance to crime, but also modernized slavery, our prison industrial complex is already using slave labor for companies. So the world described in parables is already very close to our current reality now.
Yeah.
I'll talk about two other issues that are prevalent within the book, specifically homelessness and climate change. Homelessness in the time of Octavia's writing of Parable of the Sower, homelessness in America had an impacted estimated 2 million people in 1989. According to the study guide, this is largely due to the Reagan administration's massive cuts to welfare programs and the Department of Housing and Urban Development, specifically HUD, and their budgets. The situation was exacerbated by the poverty rate, as well as the increasing gap between the rich and poor. So this is kind of what made it possible for us to be where we are now. These problems of homelessness continue to exist today, largely impacting LGBTQIA youth and adults, veterans, and individuals living with disabilities and mental illnesses, as well as people dealing with substance abuse, as well as just like families. Lots of families, like 20% were parents with kids, I believe. California, though, specifically has one of the largest populations of homeless Americans. And as Octavia was a California resident, it makes sense that homelessness would be such a prevalent theme in parables because it was something that they saw every day. Today, about 552,830 people are homeless in the US. So the number has decreased, which is positive, but still remains a consistent problem in the US that I think, considering the way the economy is swinging, could increase again, unfortunately, if we don't look out for each other. The last one I'm going to talk about is climate change. It's very short, but it's just that climate change and its impact are really prevalent in the book. And we see that in the warming of the north, the erosion of coastlines and the lack of rainfall, and the ease for fire starting. In the time this book was written, global warming was starting to be talked about. The increase in gas prices and the impact of fossil fuels was also a prevalent theme in the book. And it's something that we're seeing now as lots of people don't push for green energy and instead are just like, keep doing fossil fuels. They're working just fine. Lower gas prices, when the solution would not be that, to invest in green energy. But it's something that was really prevalent in the book, and it's actually really prevalent now, as we see in the temperature changes, in the warming, in the erosion of our coastlines. Like, all those things are actually starting the process of now. And if you remember from our environmental horror series, there are things that you can do. I recommend listening to that one. Specifically, check out climateclock.net. They'll link you to a lot of different resources. But if you're curious and want to learn about what you can do to help with climate change, go there. Specifically, what was it called with the man with the beard? Don't look up. We talk a lot about like things you can do within that episode, as well as like what climate activists have been trying to say for a very long time. We have about 7 years. So 7 years, 4 days, I checked today, to kind of get things to a better place so that we don't lose this planet and have to take root among the stars.
Yeah. Also, with climate change, just thinking of the time period, Parable of the Talents was published in 2001. And in 2000, that's when Al Gore was running for president. And he was a big advocate for climate change and understanding that we were.
Truth.
Yep. So it was right in the middle of us starting to talk about it, and no one took him serious then. So
yeah, because it was inconvenient, even though it was the truth.
Funny how that works.
Yeah, it's almost like the title just made a lot of sense. But lastly, what can we learn from these books and the life of Lauren Hoya Olamina? What do we get from this? Because that's something that was really powerful about this book, is that you left it and you're like, wow, I've learned something. And that is part doomsday prep, but that's also part just like the power of knowledge, the power of learning, the power of just like being aware of the world around you.
Mhm.
So the biggest takeaways that I got from the Earthseed series, other than maybe like a new religion for myself, but
Mhm.
it was to learn as much as possible while you can. Learn about the land you live in, learn how to utilize and cultivate plant life native to your area, learn to decolonize your view of this land and how, if necessary, you will need to survive on it as a way in ways that you never considered before. Learn recipes and methods for cooking from scratch that don't depend on stores or capitalism. Learn skill sets that are practical and life-saving, like first aid, reading a map, self-defense, gardening, carpentry, electronics, etc. If you think it could save your life one day, learn about it as a hobby, even if it's just as a
Mhm.
hobby. You don't have to like go to school and become a doctor. It's okay. Like just try to learn as much as you can within the realm of possibility that you see and learn about, and even if it's a hobby. So learn things that will not only be useful for points of knowledge to save yourself, but to those that you love or will come to love. Prepare for change by being mindful of the world around you and what it's capable of. Prepare as much as you can and accept that no matter how hard you try, there will always be things that will surprise you. No matter how prepared you are, there will be things that surprise you. But part of just accepting that inevitability helps with coping with it.
Yeah,
Um,
and the surprises are bad and good.
yeah. The change can be like really positive change or horrific change. And like both are possible at all intervals of your life. All you can do is like kind of adjust to that, adapt. You have to be adaptive. Um, but doing these things will not only help you in the long run in surviving an unexpected and chaotic situation, but will also help like you and your current environment influence positively around you. In addition to just attaining knowledge, you can prepare yourself in other ways, like making go bags, hidden caches, organizing yourself in ways that support you in dealing with change. The book offers a lot of just like helpful go bag suggestions, stocking for it specifically, in the accumulating cash, maps, medical supplies, seeds that are native to your area, tools, survival items like water tablets, quality pieces of clothing, etc., will also be an essential piece to surviving in an unexpected situation. It'll also help alleviate that anxiety that kind of goes into this feeling of not being in control of what's happening.
Mhm.
It just kind of like lets you exhale a little bit as you kind of have like next steps. You're like, wow, okay, there are things that I can be doing.
Yeah, you have a fallback.
Mhm. So things that you can be learning about. I found some websites. I want to kind of expand on this as time happens, kind of similarly to our last series on F the Patriarchy. I don't want to kind of like have these exist as static, never changing blogs. I want them to change. You know what I mean? Um,
Mhm. Like
so
God.
yeah, exactly. It's change. So I found a website that allows you to search areas of plants that are native to where you live to make sure you're working with your environment instead of against it. It's called nwf.org, Native Plant Finder. That would also help climate change in that you're building your local and environment around you in a way that like helps nature and
Yeah, you're not
ultimately,
bringing invasive species in.
yeah, that will destroy everything. I remember seeing on Facebook, there's like, collect a bunch of seeds and throw them out your car window while you're driving. It's like, no, because like invasive species exist. Make sure they're native to your area. Uh,
Mhm.
but this like ultimately also helps climate change. There's also ways you can play and places you can learn and be taught about foraging and herbalism. I found the Herbal Academy. They offer courses. They were a little expensive, but it did find it interesting. In foraging, it's important to be mindful of the environments around you and your impact on them. Learn about the ways in which different plants grow and the importance of not over foraging or damaging local ecosystems. I found the atlasobscura.com, which offers how to forage wild foods. There's also like a lot of TikTokers that exist that do this too. Obviously,
Mhm.
they do so safely. And do so in a way that you don't become an invasive species more than we already are as humans.
Yeah, and
Um,
there might be like local groups too that teach you foraging and gardening as well.
yeah. If you do not have a green thumb like me, I can't grow things. I'm so bad at it. I murder everything I touch. In terms of plants. So I'm
Mhm.
trying to unlearn that. I'm trying to figure out how to not be that. So that's part of
Yeah.
my learning journey right now. I also found a really interesting thing called the Gathering Basket Cookbooks, which is rooted in the cultivation of Indigenous food sovereignty and elevating and preserving Indigenous narratives. It's called iCollective, and it's developing a cookbook and webinar series to assist in strengthening and connecting our people to their food, specifically Indigenous people. Indigenous food sovereignty is critical because many health issues are tied to colonialism and the exploitation of resources, lands, and people. So it's called icollective.org.
icollectiveinc.org. I'll also add Fresh Banana Leaves, which is healing the Indigenous landscape through Indigenous science, which I've recently started, actually, like when I went out and bought it because of our eco horror series. So now I'm like even more motivated.
Yeah. No, it feels all like very tangible things that like you can be doing that can be fun too. Like reading this book, as horrifying it was fun.
Yeah, I will also add, like, because it wasn't something that was entirely like touched upon because it wasn't really prevalent. Like the issues weren't there in the 80s or like in 93, 2001 to this degree. But there's also the issue of media literacy, which is like our whole show.
Yeah.
But it's just understanding the impact that media has, like just understanding how that has shaped the understanding of the world around us, like people who only get a certain type of media that are teaching them or instilling those things. Like it just confirms some of those fears that they have of this idea that like crime was on the rise. It's like, because news was telling you crime is on the rise. And instead of you asking, like, what are they not showing us? What is this news not telling us? Like, we're not asking those critical questions of media. And so that contributes to the problem too. In Talents, there's a bit of dabbling into like VR, which I found very interesting that even though like, because again, VR didn't exist in 93. So I don't think she like would have even imagined that there's also an entire like discussion to be had about how VR can generate empathy in a way, but it can also be a harmful tool for teaching people how to like be reactive and like desensitize them to certain violence. Like sometimes, like to conserve bullets, we have like military professionals shooting in VR, so they learn how to do that. They see an enemy that's just like a faceless person. Now they can go and do that all the time. But then on the other side, so it can put people into situations and force them to have to live through them, encouraging empathy in a way that like regular media just can't do. So it's like, again, it's kind of this idea of change, right? And how it's all a matter of whose hands it's in, like religion too. It's like whose hands are shaping this religion, whose hands are shaping this technology, because that's what's going to like impact how it's going to come about and if it's going to be harmful or powerful, like empowering.
Whose hands are making your favorite movies or books? Whose hands are teaching in your schools? Whose hands are making the textbooks that go in the schools?
And whose hands are taking stuff away, like taking stuff out of the textbooks or, not telling those stories.
No, exactly. And it's also like, if you watch Stranger Things recently, there's like that whole tie back to like D&D was seen as like Satanism. No, it's just like a fun role-playing game.
Yeah.
But like people viscerally like feared it with like so much, like the amount of, you really just have to know what you're taking in and like why and how and like looking at it critically.
Yeah. And understanding it's like a distraction tactic. Yeah, there's so much to be said about this series that I definitely didn't like. We could talk about it forever. Why the episode is so long as it is, because there's so much to unpack, because she really is going over a lot, and we're used to like, or at least I'm used to covering like a film that's like top 2-3 hours long, right? And covering that. But these are two entire, very lengthy, very jam-packed books that are really like testaments to the world that she saw. And I really appreciated your section, Kat, in like putting those things into context, right? Because like we're reading it in the modern day and we're like, wow, it's horrible. But she like inferred from where she was, and she's not far off. Like she knew it was going to get worse in all of these different aspects. And that's exactly true. And she knows why. Like I said it in the last one, just like one of the things that stuck with me from the Lilith's Brood series is like this idea that humanity's sickness, like the one thing that keeps us here, is this need to like put ourselves in the caste system and to compete with each other in this way instead of like uniting
Yeah.
as a people, right? It's just like we need to like come together, like that's what she says, isn't it? Like
Yeah.
diversity, like
Yeah. That's one of the quotes that I wrote down from Parable of the Talents. Actually, it's really funny that you bring that up. Because it's like we humans seem to always have to find comfort in to have someone else to look down on, a bottom level of fellow creatures who are very vulnerable, but who can somehow be blamed or punished for all of our troubles.
Yeah. I will say, like, so the Earthseed series is, as we said, incomplete. But for
Mm-hmm.
me, I was kind of finding, and I don't know if this is like the intent. I actually don't even know. Let me, um, one second. Let's Brood. Let's see when the first one was published. 1987. Okay, so it was even before.
Yeah.
So she did before. But the Lilith's Brood series is like, it's science fiction because we are with aliens. The world, we blew ourselves up essentially. We made the Earth uninhabitable, and now we have to like kind of reconcile with what humans are going to have to become in order to survive. And so I'm like,
Yeah.
that's kind of like, we're in the stars, baby. Like,
Yeah, like if anything, like that's the sequel that
even though
everyone
it
was
came
looking for,
before
but it's
you.
written out of order. But I mean, okay, if we think about last episode and her whole like life story, she wrote a lot of this stuff when she was like 12
Mm-hmm.
and then took those ideas and put them into books. So
She also likes to write backwards, like with the
mhm,
Patternist series. She read the
yeah,
Patternist first, and then went back and like to figure out how she got to there. So
yeah,
I think Lilith's Brood in a way is like this, answer in a way. Like if Earthsea didn't exist,
yeah,
then Lilith's Brood makes sense because uh there's the hope in the end of Earthsea that we do go to the stars actively, like we did it.
yeah,
Whereas in Lilith's Brood, it's like someone came and saved us. So
yeah,
ultimately, I think like for Octavia, it's just like we gotta get out of here. Like we messing this
yeah.
up. There's no planet B. It's messing like we gotta get out of here. And whether that's someone swooping in, saving the day, or
I'll be real. I'm
mm,
happy. I'm probably not going to get to go to the stars. I think that's where my level of acceptance changed.
yeah.
Because like that seems scary and a lot, and I'm okay if everyone else goes to the stars and I stay here until gone now, and that's
Yeah.
okay. But I'm going to help them get to the stars. That's fine with me, 100%. Set everyone like help them get there. But scary for I don't want to be in space.
Yeah, I will say I've
It's like
always
underwater but up.
yeah, I hate yeah, you know how I feel about space, claustrophobia ain't having it. But I
Yeah.
will say one of the biggest things that would always like where I was like, there's no way I would ever go to space. One, there's like the financial thing, right? Like we
Mhm.
the wealthier going to space if we are gonna put a thing. But there's also
Yeah.
like there are specific qualifications. Like if we're sending people to space, they're gonna be like doctors and scientists and people who are gonna like do that. But I think
It's a
the
boat analogy, yeah, who
yeah,
you save.
but I think the issue, like, and so before I was like, I'm not going to go because I don't have any practical reasons to be in space. Like, what can I contribute to the future of society? But I'm like, wait a second, actually, no, I can because I contribute to education, to like
Mhm.
culture, right? So it's like, yeah, we can bring scientists and doctors or whatever, we keep people alive, we make plants, but what do people do? Like,
Yeah.
how do we like keep people being people and not slaves or just like drones, right? And so I
Mhm.
think educators and creatives have every right to be in space and actually should be there. Like if we're gonna go somewhere else, like that's
Yeah.
also a necessity.
You're
And
gonna need
it's
art.
yeah, and they keep
You're gonna
trying
need
to
shapers, Gabe.
gonna
You're
need
gonna need them.
shapers. And that's why, they're always trying to defund art programs, and it's just like another form of oppression. Um,
Yeah.
and silencing. So yeah, I
It's
will
almost
say
systemic.
like you were saying, sorry, like you were saying with the like find yourself a hobby. I was thinking that, and I was talking to my fiance about it, where we were like, what would be the hobby that you would take up now so that we can prepare for the apocalypse? And like one of them,
Yeah.
obviously, like you were saying, is gardening. Like I have started reading up on it, figuring out how I can use the environment around me and using non-invasive species of of
Yeah.
plant life and all of that, and just like, again, combating the green thumb. Like I actually grew vegetables last year, and it was so exciting. It was
Yeah.
like thrilling. I was like, oh my God, I made a thing.
Yeah.
And then, my partner had said like he would try to learn like first aid or like different things for like health wise. But I was like, I think I'd also want to learn like some like electrical or like carpentry or something, like
Yeah.
those kind of practical things that you don't ever think about as being like necessary in the apocalypse.
Yeah, I would totally be a carpenter. I love building things with my hands. It's very fun. I would
Me
murder all the
too.
plants. I shouldn't be near them, but I need to learn how at the same time. I murdered my sunflowers. I'm still very sad about it. I tried really
You
hard.
gotta try another one. That's
Yeah,
all.
I just need to get the right equipment. I think that's it. I
Mm.
used a random bin that I drilled holes into to give water. What is the word called?
Yeah,
And it was like,
irrigate.
no, we're dying. And I was like, oh no.
Yes.
um,
So many things that this book teaches us and inspires us. And um, yeah, I mean, God is change. And
Yeah. Now I want to read everything else by her, for real, for real. I want to read Lilith's Brood. I want to read all the other things. And I'm like, can we just always talk about Octavia Butler? Can we just like be one with her brain?
no, but we can listen to those other shows.
That's true.
And we can read things that were inspired by her, some Adrienne Marie Brown, some
Mhm.
Tanana Reeve Do, like all of those.
Maybe we'll bring
And
it in here. Maybe we'll talk about it on here. I'll be like, look, learn more stuff.
yes, yeah, always. If you have suggestions, if you have recommendations for books that are similar to that or inspiring, that,
Tell us.
Octavia would love, we
Mhm.
would love as Octavia fans, please tell us. Also, let us know your thoughts. We'd love to hear how you feel about Octavia, and about Parable of the Sower and Talents. Um, become a shaper with us,
Yeah.
and remember to like and subscribe, because it means a lot to us, to
Yeah.
hear from you and to get that support, and so that people know that like we're out here.
Mhm.
um, Next week we're going to be focusing on a different writer. We're going to be talking about Margaret Atwood, so tune in for that. I think it'll be not what you're expecting. So,
Yeah.
and we'll be talking about Handmaid's Tale following that, not the show, because we've already done that. So make sure you check out that episode for fun.
Mhm.
That was our Oppression of Women Part 2,
Yeah.
and we're dressed up for the episode, so that's
Oh
fun.
God. Yeah, I know. I remember we did do that.
Yeah, yeah.
It's before.
Any other thoughts, Kat?
I don't know, man. Just keep learning.
Mm-hmm.
Keep doing it. And as I come up with more ways to learn, we'll do it. We'll have form community. I like really don't like talking to people, but I will if it makes the world not die. That's kind of how I feel. Introverts unite.
Yeah, yeah. You know, with a good
Neurodivergent
person,
people unite. Talk
Yeah.
to other people sometimes and use your hyperfixation as your special quirk if you're in the My Hero Academia universe to learn so much about all these things that are super important, because it'll be really valuable in the future, probably.
Yeah. No, yeah, do it. Like, channel all that dread and overwhelming misery that we feel about the world around us. Like, channel that. Like, if you're like feeling very hopeless, then sometimes just like reading about those things, acknowledging how we got here and how we can
Yeah.
try to stop progressing into this hellscape that Octavia wrote for us.
Mhm.
And, do some of those things that'll make you feel like at least you're not just pretending it's not real.
Yeah. It's like when you're sad and you listen to sad songs. It's like the
Yeah,
same thing.
you
It's
just
like,
want to wallow.
yeah, but it's like they make you feel better somehow. You're like, wow, I actually feel better after listening to that person just like sing how I feel, because it validates you. Just do that, but with like practical life skills, and also like reading books. And if not reading to books, just listening to them.
Yeah. Like,
And
yeah,
then
sometimes you're like just in the dark and you're like, I want to continue to be sad.
if you wake up at 2 a.m., don't just
Right.
sit there. Just do something that makes you tired, because our sleep schedule isn't like based in science.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing you could ever learn from Octavia Butler and from us is to question everything.
Yeah.
It's like, you don't take everything as just gold, right? Like, saying that's just the way it's always been is one, incorrect. It has
Yeah.
not always been that way. And ask, why is it like that? It's okay to ask questions, and you should.
Everything you touch, you change. And
And
everything,
everything
you
you
change changes you.
God is
So,
change. All right. Well, don't get married. Delete your kids. Or
if
just
you
steal
have
them.
or they'll
Or
steal
steal them. They steal your kids. So
I'm still
that happens
sad
a lot.
about it.
It's so
And in
happens so
actual
much.
life, but in this specifically,
Okay, bye.